At my sister-in-law's wedding rehearsal dinner, I arrived to find no place setting for me. Bianca, my husband's viciously perfect sister, smirked from the head table. "Oh darling," she purred, "we only reserved seats for important guests." The groom's aristocratic family tittered. My husband shrugged. "Don't make a scene, Hannah." I didn't. I excused myself to freshen up and set the timer on Bianca's downfall. I knew it was coming the moment Bianca's champagne glass clinked against the Swarovski crystal chandelier. The entire ballroom fell silent, exactly as she'd planned. "A toast," she announced, her voice dripping with false warmth that fooled everyone except those who truly knew her. I tightened my grip on my champagne flute, the stem nearly snapping between my fingers. My husband Victor remained oblivious, his attention caught by some investment banker's joke across the room. Damien Lambert stood proudly at the center of the charity gala he'd organized, the culmination of months of work to benefit children's cancer research. At 65, he carried himself with the quiet dignity of someone who'd built his empire from nothing, unlike my father-in-law Nathaniel Cara, who'd inherited his wealth and multiplied it through connections rather than innovation. "To Damien," Bianca continued, her crimson lips curving into what others might mistake for a smile. "I knew better. For bringing us all together tonight. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to thank each of you for being part of this incredible journey. If you're enjoying these stories of calculated revenge and social justice, consider subscribing. It's completely free and helps support more tales of those who refuse to remain powerless in the face of cruelty. Now, let's watch as Hannah sets the timer on her sister-in-law's downfall." The crowd murmured appreciatively. The annual Starlight Gala represented the pinnacle of high society in our city, an event where business deals were sealed with handshakes between dessert courses and reputations were made or broken by a single whispered comment. "Though," Bianca added, her voice dropping to a theatrical stage whisper that somehow carried across the marble floor, "I must say the lighting is particularly flattering for you tonight, Damien. It almost disguises that shiny head of yours." A few nervous titters rippled through the crowd. "What did they call you in the Tribune profile last month? The bald eagle of business." She laughed lightly, twirling a lock of her expensively highlighted hair. "Though I've always thought vulture might be more accurate considering how you've circled the Wilcox merger." The laughter stopped. Several investors from the Wilcox deal stood nearby, and Damien's recent acquisition had been controversial but perfectly legal. I watched the color drain from Nathaniel's face as his daughter continued her verbal assault, destroying in seconds the business relationship he'd cultivated for years. "Bianca," I whispered urgently, stepping toward her. "That's enough." She ignored me completely as she always did. Victor's insignificant wife, the woman who wasn't born into money and therefore would never truly belong in her world. "To our bald vulture," she concluded, raising her glass higher. "May your talons never lose their grip." Silence crashed through the room like a physical wave. I caught Damien's eye across the crowd. The steel in his gaze was unmistakable, cold, calculating, and suddenly very, very dangerous. This wasn't just a social faux pas. This was business suicide. Nathaniel finally moved, crossing the room with remarkable speed for a man his size. "My apologies, Damien," he said loudly, gripping Bianca's elbow with barely disguised fury. "My daughter's sense of humor sometimes exceeds her sense of propriety. She meant no disrespect." "Of course not," Bianca agreed smoothly, though her eyes told a different story. She'd meant every word. The petty revenge for Damien declining her pitch for heading the Lambert Foundation's marketing division last month. She never could handle rejection. "No offense taken," Damien replied, his voice glacial. "Though I'd be careful about birds of prey analogies, Ms. Cara. Even vultures serve a purpose in nature's hierarchy." The orchestra struck up again, desperate to fill the awkward silence. Victor finally appeared at my side, squeezing my hand while completely missing the tension vibrating through the air. "Everything okay?" he asked cheerfully. "Fine," I lied, watching as Nathaniel forced Bianca to approach Damien directly. Her apology was a masterpiece of insincerity. "I'm terribly sorry if my toast came across as inappropriate, Damien. You know how I adore your unique profile." Damien's nod was so stiff it might have cracked. "Of course, Bianca. Your candor has always been your most distinctive quality." That should have been the end of it. A social misstep, smoothed over with practiced politeness. But I'd spent enough time observing the dynamics between these powerful families to recognize the tremor that had just rippled through the foundation of their carefully constructed alliance. "He'll never forgive her," a voice murmured at my elbow. I turned to find Zoe Lambert, Damien's daughter, and, surprisingly, my closest friend in this world of sharks disguised as socialites. Unlike the other trust fund children, Zoe had actually worked her way up in her father's company, starting in the mailroom despite her last name. "Your father has always been gracious," I offered diplomatically. Zoe snorted delicately, steering me toward the terrace doors. "In public, yes. But did you see his eyes?" Outside, the summer night enveloped us in blessed quiet. The city skyline glittered beneath us, the Lambert Tower's distinctive silhouette dominating the view. "Dad's been looking for an exit strategy from your in-laws' business for months," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "This merger with the Hartleys that Nathaniel keeps bragging about. It's built on sand. The only reason Dad hasn't pulled out completely is because of the history between our families." I absorbed this information silently, filing it away like the loaded weapon it was. For 3 years I'd endured Bianca's subtle jabs, her ways of reminding me I would always be an outsider. The scholarship girl who'd somehow snagged the Kara heir but would never truly belong. "Don't repeat that," Zoe added quickly. "Dad would kill me. But I thought you should know." Before I could respond, the terrace doors flew open. Nathaniel emerged, booming with artificial joviality, his arms slung around Damien's stiff shoulders. "The future looks bright, doesn't it, Damien? Once we finalize the Hartley merger next month, we'll dominate the entire eastern seaboard." "Indeed," Damien replied, his smile tight and empty. I noticed how it didn't reach his eyes, the same eyes that had locked with mine earlier, filled with quiet fury. More guests spilled out onto the terrace as the fundraising portion of the evening concluded. Victor found me again, wrapped in his carefree bubble of privilege, utterly unaware of the business apocalypse his sister had nearly triggered. "Dad says we've raised $8 million tonight," he told me proudly. "Bianca's already planning how to leverage it for the wedding publicity." Of course she was. Bianca's upcoming marriage to the Hartley heir had nothing to do with love and everything to do with merging two family empires. I nodded and smiled, playing my part as the supportive wife while inwardly contemplating the web of lies and leverage that held this glittering world together. At precisely 10 o'clock the fireworks began, exploding over the river in brilliant cascades of light. As everyone's faces turned skyward, I made my decision. 3 years of subtle humiliation. 3 years of being the outsider, tolerated but never accepted. 3 years of watching Bianca crush anyone who stood in her way with the casual cruelty of someone who'd never faced consequences. As the colors burst overhead, illuminating Bianca's perfect profile, I made a silent vow that froze into determination within my chest. She would pay for her arrogance. Not tomorrow, not next week, but when the moment was perfect. I would remember Damien's steel gaze, Zoe's whispered intelligence, and the fault lines running through the Kara family empire. Bianca had no idea that tonight, with one champagne toast and a thoughtless insult, she had sown the seeds of her own destruction. 2 months after the gala, gilt-edged invitations arrived announcing the engagement of Bianca Elizabeth Kara to Mr. Alexander Preston Hartley III. The envelope weighed more than my wedding ring, the paper so thick it nearly qualified as cardboard. Victor brought it home with a mix of excitement and trepidation. "Mother says it's going to be the social event of the year," he explained, watching me examine the elaborate calligraphy. "The press coverage alone will boost company stock by 5%. I set the invitation on our kitchen counter. "How romantic." Victor missed my sarcasm entirely. "Well, it's not just about romance, is it? The Hartleys control shipping routes we need, and we have the distribution network they've been trying to build for a decade." He kissed my cheek absently. "It's a perfect match. Perfect for everyone except the couple themselves, perhaps." I'd met Alexander Hartley exactly twice. Once at a charity auction where he'd spent the evening glued to his phone, and again at a Christmas party where he'd gotten so drunk he'd called his own sister by the wrong name. Bianca had previously referred to him as that pompous Hartley boor, before suddenly deciding he was the love of her life. The engagement party a week later was held at the Kara family estate, a sprawling mansion with manicured gardens that had been featured in architectural magazines across the globe. I wore emerald green, knowing it would irritate Bianca, who had specifically requested guests wear pastels to complement her blush-pink gown. "You look beautiful," Zoe whispered when she found me near the champagne fountain. "And exactly like someone who didn't read the dress code memo." I smiled innocently. Was there a memo? Zoe's laugh drew attention. She looked radiant in a silver dress that matched her prematurely gray hair, a trait she'd inherited from Damien and wore with striking confidence. "Dad sends his regrets," she said, lowering her voice. "Sudden business in Tokyo. How convenient. Isn't it?" Her eyes sparkled with mischief. "Though he did send a rather obscenely expensive vase as an engagement gift. Antique Chinese. Ugliest thing you've ever seen, but worth more than most people's homes." Across the room, Bianca held court, her left hand strategically positioned to catch the light. The diamond on her finger was massive, at least 10 carats, cushion cut with smaller diamonds forming a halo around it. Alexander stood slightly behind her, looking uncomfortable in his tuxedo, his attention repeatedly drifting to his phone. "They look thrilled," I murmured. "Oh, they're ecstatic," Zoe replied dryly. "About the stock options. Did you know the prenup negotiations took longer than their actual courtship?" The evening progressed predictably, elaborate hors d'oeuvres, string quartet playing inoffensive classical pieces and endless champagne. Nathaniel clinked his glass for attention, his face flushed with triumph rather than paternal pride. "To new beginnings," he toasted, his gaze sweeping meaningfully across the assembled business associates rather than focusing on the couple. "And to the joining of two great families, and their enterprises." Polite applause followed. I scanned the crowd, noting the mixture of genuine congratulations and calculated networking. My attention caught on Mr. Hartley Sr., standing slightly apart from the celebration. Despite the air conditioning, beads of sweat dotted his forehead as he frantically scrolled through his phone. When he noticed me watching, he quickly pocketed the device and forced a smile. I excused myself from Zoe and drifted toward the bar, positioning myself near enough to overhear his urgent whisper to an associate. "Don't care what we have to liquidate. Just keep it quiet until after the merger announcement next week." I sipped my champagne slowly, mentally filing away this fragment of conversation. The foundation wasn't just cracking, it was beginning to crumble. Later that night, as Victor and I drove home, his usual carefree demeanor had vanished. He gripped the steering wheel with unusual tension, his knuckles white in the darkness. "Is everything okay?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. He hesitated. "Just business stress. Nothing for you to worry about. I'm your wife. If something's bothering you, I want to know." Victor sighed heavily. "It's this merger. If the Hartley deal falls through." He trailed off, then admitted reluctantly, "Dad's leveraged almost everything on this. The wedding, the merger announcement, the expansion plans, it's all tied together. One domino falls, they all fall." I placed my hand over his. "I'm sure it will work out." "Of course it will," he agreed too quickly. "Bianca won't let it fail. She's already got the wedding plan down to the last petal." I didn't mention the sweat on Mr. Hartley's brow or his frantic phone call. Some observations were best kept to myself. 3 days later, Zoe called me at midnight. I slipped out of bed, leaving Victor sleeping deeply, and took the call in our home office. "Hannah, sorry for the late hour, but I thought you should know." Zoe's voice was tight with suppressed excitement. "Dad's reached his breaking point with the Caras. He's liquidating all shares in their joint ventures tomorrow afternoon." My heart raced. "Tomorrow? Are you sure?" "Positive. The paperwork's already drawn up. He's calling Nathaniel at 2 o'clock to break the news." She paused. "It's going to be brutal. The market will react immediately." "What about the Hartley merger?" "That's the thing. It's built entirely on the foundation of our company's partnership. Once Dad pulls out, the whole house of cards collapses." I closed my eyes, visualizing the timing. "The rehearsal dinner is tomorrow night." "Is it?" Zoe feigned innocence poorly. "What unfortunate timing." After we hung up, I sat in the darkened office, possibilities unfolding before me like a chess match reaching its conclusion. 3 years of calculated patience, of watching and waiting, had led to this perfect moment. The pieces were aligned: Bianca's cruelty, Nathaniel's arrogance, and their business built on exploitation rather than innovation. I picked up my phone and scrolled to a number I rarely used. My finger hovered over it briefly before I pressed call. Damien answered on the second ring, his voice alert despite the hour. Hannah, is everything all right? Everything's fine, I assured him, my voice steady as a surgeon's hand. I hope I'm not calling too late. Not at all. What can I do for you? I chose my words carefully. Zoe mentioned you're planning some significant business changes tomorrow. Pause. She shouldn't have shared that information. Probably not, I agreed. But she did. And it got me thinking about timing. Timing. I traced a pattern on my desk, my voice dropping to almost a whisper. What if you moved your timeline up? To tonight? The silence stretched between us, charged with understanding. Tonight, he repeated slowly. During the rehearsal dinner, you mean? I didn't confirm or deny. I didn't need to. Damien's low chuckle held no humor, only recognition of a worthy strategist. You've always seen more than others give you credit for, haven't you, Hannah? I observe, I said simply. And now you want to act. Justice delayed is justice denied, isn't that what they say? Another long pause, then, I'll need to make some calls. Of course. I wouldn't want to keep you. As I prepared to hang up, his voice stopped me. Hannah, why now after all this time? I thought of Bianca's smirk at the gala, of years of subtle dismissals and not-so-subtle humiliations, of being treated as an outsider in my own family. Let's just say I believe in perfect timing. I ended the call and sat motionless in the darkness, the quiet hum of anticipation buzzing beneath my skin. Tomorrow night, Bianca's perfect world would shatter, and I would be there to witness every moment of her downfall. I arrived at the rehearsal dinner the following evening with Victor, dressed in a midnight blue gown that complemented my carefully applied makeup. Nothing too flashy, nothing that would draw attention. Tonight wasn't about me. Tonight I was merely the observer, the invisible catalyst who had set events in motion. The venue, an exclusive restaurant overlooking the city skyline, had been rented out entirely for the occasion. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the gathered elite. The Cara family, the Hartleys, and a carefully curated selection of influential business associates. Bianca had arranged the seating with strategic precision. I noted with grim satisfaction that my place card was tucked between two elderly aunts at the table furthest from the bridal party. I'll have them fix it, Victor offered when he noticed, but I placed a gentle hand on his arm. It's fine, I assured him. I'm happy where I am. And I was. My peripheral position would give me the perfect vantage point to watch the impending catastrophe. I checked my watch discreetly. 7:45 p.m. Damien had confirmed by text that everything was in place. His team had executed the share liquidation with silent efficiency over the past 18 hours. Financial news outlets had been alerted, time to break the story at precisely 8 p.m., right as Nathaniel would be giving his rehearsal dinner speech. The first course arrived, a delicate arrangement of scallops that I barely tasted. My attention was fixed on the head table, where Bianca preened in a silver-sheathed dress, a diamond necklace catching the light with every movement. It had been a pre-wedding gift from Alexander, though I suspected it was another strategic investment, another piece of collateral in their transaction disguised as romance. At 5 minutes to 8, Nathaniel rose from his seat, champagne glass in hand. The murmur of conversation died down as he cleared his throat. Distinguished guests, beloved family members, he began, his voice carrying the practiced resonance of someone accustomed to boardroom speeches. We gather tonight on the eve of a momentous occasion, not just the union of two people, but the joining of two great legacies. I took a small sip of wine, savoring the moment like the vintage in my glass. Tomorrow, when Bianca and Alexander exchange vows, they will be cementing more than their love. They will be forging the future. A future of prosperity, growth, and... His phone buzzed loudly against the table. Nathaniel frowned, glancing down at the screen. His face remained composed, but I caught the slight tightening around his eyes. He silenced the device and continued. As I was saying, a future of unprecedented opportunity for... The phone buzzed again. And again. And again. Not just his now but phones throughout the room. The soft chime of notifications created a discordant symphony that drowned out his words. Mr. Hartley was the first to check his device. I watched the blood drain from his face in real time, leaving him ashen under the chandelier light. Nathaniel, he interrupted, his voice strangled. The stock. The rest of his sentence was lost as Nathaniel's phone rang. A distinctive ringtone he used only for his most critical business calls. With a strained smile, he excused himself. "One moment, please. I'm sure it's nothing." But it wasn't nothing. Through the glass partition separating the private dining room from the corridor, we could all see Nathaniel's expression transform. Disbelief. Rage. The progression was fascinating to witness, like watching a sculpture crack from within. He reappeared a moment later, face contorted. "What do you mean he's withdrawn?" His scream silenced the orchestra, the glass he'd been holding shattering against the floor. "That's impossible. The paperwork wasn't finalized until next week." The room froze. Bianca's hand flew to her throat, clutching at her diamond necklace as though it suddenly restricted her breathing. "Father." Her voice held a note I'd never heard before, pure fear. Nathaniel didn't respond. He was shouting into his phone, spittle flying from his lips. "Call him back. Tell Lambert he can't do this. The announcement is Monday." The name Lambert rippled through the room. Guests began checking their own phones, gasps and murmurs building into a crescendo of panic. "Cara Industries plummets 43% in after-hours trading," someone read aloud. "Lambert Enterprises severs all ties with Cara Industries, effective immediately," another voice added. "Hartley Global expected to withdraw from merger talks." Mr. Hartley Sr. swayed on his feet, his complexion turning from white to gray to a concerning shade of green. He reached for the table to steady himself, missed, and collapsed face-first into his chocolate soufflé. The chaos that followed was exquisite. Waiters rushed to Mr. Hartley's aid while business associates huddled in corners, frantically calling their brokers. The orchestra, unsure whether to continue playing, awkwardly transitioned to a somber melody that only heightened the sense of disaster. And through it all, Bianca stood statue still, the realization dawning across her perfect features. This wasn't just a business setback. This was the end of everything she'd planned. "The wedding," she whispered, then louder. "The wedding. What about the wedding?" Alexander was already on his phone, his back turned to his fiancée as he barked orders to his financial team. The gesture said everything. When faced with choosing between Bianca and his family's money, there was no contest. Bianca's composure cracked. She lunged at Victor, who had been watching the scene unfold with the same stunned expression as everyone else. "Do something," she screamed, her manicured nails digging into his arm. "Call your contacts. Call someone. This can't be happening." Victor looked helplessly from his sister to his father, who was now slumped in a chair, phone pressed to his ear as he begged his legal team for options. "I don't think there's anything we can do, he said softly. "If Lambert's pulled out. I don't care what he's done." Her voice rose to a pitch that made crystal ring. "Fix it." I remained in my seat, calmly lifting my wine glass to my lips. Our eyes met across the chaos, Bianca's wild with desperation, mine steady with satisfaction. For just a moment, a flash of suspicion crossed her face, quickly replaced by renewed panic as Alexander's father regained consciousness only to immediately begin calling his broker. By midnight the restaurant had emptied. The Hartleys had departed en masse, Alexander trailing behind his family without so much as a goodbye to his fiancée. Business associates had melted away, eager to distance themselves from the imploding Cara empire. Only the immediate family remained, shell-shocked in the aftermath. Victor and I returned to the Cara estate with Nathaniel and Bianca. The house, which had been transformed with floral arrangements for tomorrow's garden ceremony, now felt like a funeral parlor. Bianca disappeared upstairs while Nathaniel locked himself in his study with a bottle of scotch. Dawn broke with the inevitable announcement. The wedding was cancelled. I found Bianca in her room, surrounded by wedding gifts that would now be returned. Her designer gown hung on the closet door, mockingly perfect in its ivory splendor. She wasn't wearing makeup, her hair tangled from a sleepless night. When she looked up, her eyes were red-rimmed, but I knew, just as I knew the sun would rise, that she wasn't crying for love. She was crying for the empire that had slipped through her fingers, for the status she'd lost, for the future that had evaporated in a single evening. "Are you happy now?" she whispered hoarsely. I leaned against the doorframe. Why would I be happy about your wedding being cancelled? Her laugh was bitter hollow. Don't pretend. I saw your face last night. You enjoyed every second. I didn't deny it. Some truths didn't need to be spoken aloud to be perfectly understood. I left Bianca's room without responding to her accusation. There was nothing to say. We both knew what had happened even if she didn't understand exactly how I'd orchestrated it. In the hallway, I nearly collided with Victor, who looked like he hadn't slept at all. Dad's in his study, he said, his voice rough. He's been on the phone with Damien Lambert all night. I nodded, feigning sympathy. Any progress? Victor ran a hand through his disheveled hair. None. Lambert won't budge. Dad's offered everything. Increased shares, board positions, even naming rights on the new headquarters. And Damien's response? He just keeps referring to some formal letter his legal team sent over. Victor leaned against the wall, suddenly looking older than his 32 years. Apparently it states, effective immediately, all ties are severed. No negotiation, no transition period. Just done. From downstairs came the sound of something shattering, Nathaniel's temper finding a physical outlet. I winced, not entirely acting. The house had been in the Cara family for generations, its antiques and artwork worth millions. Nathaniel's rage would only compound their losses. The stock is still falling, Victor continued, checking his phone. Down 62% now. The business press is calling it Black Friday, even though it's Tuesday. He looked up at me, eyes bloodshot. We're ruined, Hannah. I placed a comforting hand on his arm. Not ruined. Changed maybe. You don't understand. Everything, the house, the vacation properties, even our personal accounts, it's all tied to company stock and assets. Dad leveraged everything for the Hartley merger. Everything? I asked, genuine surprise coloring my voice. I'd anticipated financial damage but not complete devastation. Victor nodded grimly. The prenup negotiations took so long because Dad was hiding our liquidity issues. The Hartleys wanted guarantees we couldn't actually provide without the merger itself. Another crash from downstairs punctuated his words. We both glanced toward the sound, then back at each other. You should get some rest, I suggested gently. Tomorrow will be difficult enough. Tomorrow. Victor laughed hollowly. Tomorrow we start selling assets to pay creditors. Tomorrow the board meets to discuss whether Dad should step down. Tomorrow our lawyers meet with the SEC to address insider trading allegations someone has mysteriously filed. I kept my expression neutral. The SEC complaint had been Zoe's idea, a detail I hadn't known about until it was already done. As Victor turned to go, he paused, studying my face with unexpected intensity. You knew this would happen. It wasn't a question. His eyes, so like his father's but warmer, more perceptive, held mine steadily. In that moment, I realized he'd always been more observant than his family gave him credit for. Not exactly, I replied carefully. Not the scale of it. But you knew something. He stepped closer. When Dad announced the merger, you didn't seem surprised at all when it collapsed. You were ready. I maintained his gaze, neither confirming nor denying. After a long moment, a strange expression crossed his face. Not anger or betrayal, but something like respect. Remind me never to underestimate you, he said quietly, then continued down the hall to his old bedroom. The next week unfolded like a slow-motion car crash. Spectacular, devastating, and impossible to look away from. The business press documented every painful detail of what they dubbed the Cara collapse. Investors filed lawsuits. The board forced Nathaniel to resign. The family's private jet was seized by creditors mid-flight, forcing them to return to New York on a commercial airline, in economy. Bianca's social death was perhaps the most fascinating to witness. The same friends who had vied for spots in her wedding party suddenly couldn't return her calls. Invitations to galas and charity events mysteriously stopped arriving. Her social media accounts, once filled with fawning comments, became ghost towns overnight. I accompanied Victor to their family lawyer's office 10 days after the rehearsal dinner disaster. The stately conference room felt like a funeral parlor as the attorney outlined their options. None of them pleasant. The Manhattan apartment must be sold immediately, he explained, sliding documents across the polished table. As well as the Hamptons property and the vineyard in Napa. Nathaniel, diminished in a rumpled suit, merely nodded. Bianca, however, wasn't accepting defeat so easily. "What about my personal assets?" she demanded. "My jewelry collection is insured for $8 million. The lawyer cleared his throat uncomfortably. "I'm afraid most of your collection was purchased with corporate funds or through company accounts. Those items have already been inventoried for liquidation." "That's impossible." Bianca slammed her palm on the table. "My diamond parure was a gift from father." "A gift purchased through the company as a tax write-off," the lawyer corrected gently. "The documentation is quite clear." When we left the meeting, Bianca was still arguing, her voice rising to a pitch that made the receptionist wince. Victor and I stepped into the elevator in silence. "Will you stay?" he asked suddenly as the doors closed. "With me, I mean. Now that." He gestured vaguely, encompassing the situation. I took his hand. "Do you think I married you for your money? I wouldn't blame you if you had." His smile was sad. "It's what everyone else wanted from us." "I'm not everyone else." The truth was more complicated. I hadn't married Victor for his money, but I hadn't married him for love either. Not at first. I'd married him because he was kind when his family was cruel, because he saw me when they looked through me. Love had grown later, quiet and steady. Now, watching him face his family's downfall with dignity, I realized that love had deepened into something genuine. 2 days later, Zoe invited me to lunch at a discreet restaurant far from the financial district. "To the architect of the most elegant revenge I've ever witnessed," she said, raising her water glass in a toast. "I never thought you had it in you." I smiled faintly. "I had excellent help. Dad only provided the opportunity. You recognized the perfect moment to strike." From her handbag she withdrew a small velvet pouch. "I brought you something." Inside lay a strand of perfect South Sea pearls. I recognized them immediately. Bianca had worn them to my wedding, commenting loudly about their value compared to my modest diamond pendant. "How did you?" "They were part of the asset seizure. Dad's company acquired them in the liquidation and he thought you might appreciate them." Zoe's smile was wicked. "A trophy for the real winner." We shared a conspiratorial laugh, though mine felt hollow. Revenge, I was discovering, wasn't quite as satisfying as I'd imagined. It didn't erase the years of slights and humiliations. It didn't heal old wounds, it merely balanced the scales. The following weekend I visited the Cara estate one last time. Movers were packing up the last of the family's belongings before the property went to auction. Bianca was nowhere to be seen. Rumor had it she'd accepted a distant cousin's offer of a guest house in Connecticut until she got back on her feet. In the master suite, the safe stood open and empty, save for a few pieces of jewelry deemed Nathaniel's personal property. I recognized several items he'd given Bianca over the years, pieces she'd flaunted at every opportunity. With the movers distracted downstairs, I gathered these remaining items: a diamond tennis bracelet, sapphire earrings, an emerald pendant, and slipped them into my purse. Not to keep, but for a purpose that felt like closing a circle. That evening, I made an anonymous donation to the children's cancer charity that had hosted the gala where this all began. The accompanying note specified that the jewelry be auctioned at their next fundraiser. The irony was delicious. Bianca's symbols of status would now fund the cause she'd used merely as a backdrop for her social climbing. As I walked away from the courier service, I felt a weight lift. The Cara empire had fallen, but from its ashes, something more honest might emerge. For Nathaniel, perhaps humility. For Bianca, maybe self-awareness. For Victor, definitely freedom from his family's toxic expectations. And for me, a quiet triumph, yes, but also closure. The scales had balanced. Justice, cold and precise, had been served. 3 weeks after the Cara empire's collapse, Victor and I moved into a modest brownstone in Brooklyn, a far cry from the penthouse we'd once shared. The building needed work, the hardwood floors scuffed from previous tenants, but sunlight streamed through tall windows, warming the empty rooms with promise. It was the first property either of us had owned that wasn't connected to the family fortune. "It's small," Victor said apologetically as we carried in our first boxes. "It's ours," I corrected him. "Really ours." We were building a new life from scratch. Victor had accepted a teaching position at a business school, a significant step down in prestige and salary from his former executive role, but his eyes had lit up when describing the opportunity to shape young minds without his father's shadow looming over him. I was surprised when Nathaniel asked to visit us a month after we'd settled in. He arrived looking like a different man. His designer suit replaced by khakis and a simple button-down, his luxury watch gone, his bearing less commanding but somehow more authentic. "Nice place," he said, glancing around our living room. No snide remarks, no backhanded compliments, just a simple observation. Victor had been called to the university for an emergency faculty meeting, leaving Nathaniel and me alone with a pot of coffee between us. The silence stretched uncomfortably until he cleared his throat. "I owe you an apology, Hannah." I raised an eyebrow but said nothing. "When Victor first brought you home, I saw you as..." He paused, searching for words. "Beneath you," I supplied. He nodded, surprising me with his honesty. "I was wrong. You were the only one who saw us clearly. Who saw Bianca clearly." His mention of his daughter sent a pang of something, not quite guilt but close, through me. I'd orchestrated their downfall without remorse. But sitting across from this humbled version of Nathaniel Cara, I found myself wondering about the human cost. "How is she?" I asked. Nathaniel looked down at his coffee cup. "Struggling. She hasn't adjusted well to reduced circumstances." "I imagine not. Her cousin Marcus offered her a teaching position at that finishing school he runs in Switzerland." Nathaniel's laugh held no humor. "Bianca teaching etiquette. The irony isn't lost on me. At 28, Bianca was essentially being sent to the equivalent of boarding school, a glorified exile wrapped as an opportunity. I indulged her too much," Nathaniel admitted quietly. "From the time she was little after her mother died. I thought giving her everything she wanted would make up for what she'd lost. I could have offered comfort, could have said what parents so often want to hear, that they did their best. But some lessons need to hurt to truly teach." "Yes," I agreed simply. "You did." He nodded, accepting the unvarnished truth with surprising grace. We finished our coffee in silence, and when he left, his shoulders seemed straighter, as though unburdened by the weight of pretense he'd carried for so long. That night, Victor returned home late, smelling of chalk dust and coffee. I was already in bed, reading by lamplight. He sat beside me, taking the book from my hands and setting it aside. "Dad told me about your conversation," he said. "Did he?" Victor nodded. "He also told me something interesting. Apparently, Damien Lambert approached him 2 years ago about splitting their business ventures amicably. Dad refused, tried to leverage the partnership for more control instead." "That sounds like Nathaniel," I agreed. "The thing is," Victor continued, studying my face, "Lambert specifically mentioned concerns about how Bianca treated you at family functions. He said it reminded him of how his late wife was treated by her in-laws." I kept my expression neutral, though my heart raced. "That's interesting. Dad thought it was a negotiation tactic at the time." Victor traced my cheekbone with his thumb. "But now he wonders if Lambert was waiting for the right moment, or the right person, to give him a reason to sever ties." His eyes held mine, searching. "You didn't just make a phone call that night, did you? You've been playing a longer game." I didn't answer immediately. The truth was complicated. I hadn't planned everything from the beginning, but I'd been collecting information, building relationships, waiting for an opportunity. "Does it matter now?" I asked softly. "No," he said after a moment. "Except that I'm realizing I never really knew you." His smile held a mixture of awe and wariness. "You're terrifying, and I love you for it." He kissed me then, and something shifted between us. The last pretenses falling away, leaving something raw and honest in their place. Our marriage, built initially on convenience and attraction, had transformed through crisis into something deeper, stronger for having been tested. The following morning, a courier delivered a small package addressed to me. Inside was a handwritten note on heavy stationery, accompanied by a vintage fountain pen in a leather case. "Hannah, this pen belonged to my father, who built our company from nothing. He taught me that true power comes not from wealth or status, but from patience and precision. You remind me of him. Your father would be proud. Regards, Damien Lambert." Coming from Damien, a man known for his restraint with compliments, the note felt like the highest praise. My father, a professor of ethics who died before I met Victor, had indeed valued integrity above all else. He'd be conflicted about my methods perhaps, but would have understood the justice at their core. I was turning the pen in my hands when my phone rang. Zoe, calling from her father's office where she'd taken on a more prominent role since the car collapse. "Are we still on for lunch tomorrow?" she asked without preamble. "Of course. The usual place." "Perfect." She paused. "I heard Bianca's off to Switzerland, teaching at a finishing school of all things." "So I've heard." Zoe's laugh filtered through the phone. "I'd pay good money to see Bianca Cara teaching anyone manners." We chatted briefly about Damien's health, excellent, her new responsibilities, challenging but fulfilling, and Victor's teaching position, surprisingly satisfying. As we were about to hang up, her tone shifted. "Hannah, one thing. Yes. What you did, it was justified. Necessary even." Her voice grew serious. "But be careful." "Of what?" "Of becoming what you hated." The warning was gentle but clear. Revenge can reshape you if you're not careful. After we hung up, I opened my jewelry box, finding the diamond earrings I'd kept from Bianca's collection. Not to wear, not to sell, but as a reminder. I turned them in the light, watching prisms dance across the wall. Zoe was right. The line between justice and vindictiveness was thin, easily crossed. I had orchestrated Bianca's downfall with the precision of a surgeon, but I didn't want her cruelty to become my own. I closed the box but didn't discard the earrings. Some reminders were necessary, not of victory, but of the vigilance required to prevent becoming the very thing you'd fought against. 6 months passed. Winter thawed into spring, bringing new growth to the potted plants on our Brooklyn brownstone's modest balcony. The city seemed different now. Or perhaps I was the one who had changed, viewing life through a lens no longer tinted by the Cara family's toxic influence. Victor thrived in academia, his natural charm and genuine interest in his students earning him popularity among both faculty and undergraduates. I'd occasionally pass by his classroom to find him gesturing animatedly, his students leaning forward in their seats, actually engaged, not merely performing interest to curry favor with a Cara heir. One evening, as we walked home from dinner at a neighborhood bistro, Victor surprised me with an unexpected proposal. "I had lunch with Damien Lambert today," he said casually. I raised an eyebrow. "Oh. He's interested in backing a new venture." Victor squeezed my hand. "With us." The idea was both thrilling and terrifying, starting our own firm, independent of the Cara legacy but with Lambert's strategic support. A week later we met Damien at his penthouse office. The city spread beneath us like a glittering tapestry. "The landscape has changed," Damien explained, spreading documents across his desk. "There's a void where Cara Industries once stood. A void that values ethics over expansion. You think we can fill that void?" I asked. Damien's smile was shrewd. "I think you already have the blueprint for it." He was right. During my years observing the Cara business model, I'd mentally catalogued everything they did wrong. The corners cut, the relationships leveraged to breaking, the employees treated as disposable. I'd imagined how things could be done differently, more sustainably. "We'd need to start small," Victor cautioned. "Small but significant." I agreed, ideas already flowering. "Focus on sustainable investments, transparent practices. Build something that can't be toppled by one bad merger or a single stock plunge." Damien leaned back, watching us with thinly veiled amusement. "I knew you two would find your footing. When can you start?" And just like that, Horizon Partners was born, named for the new vista opening before us. We leased a modest office in a converted industrial building, hired a small team of analysts who valued innovation over intimidation, and began building relationships with clients who shared our vision. Meanwhile, across town, another phoenix was rising from the ashes of the Cara collapse. Nathaniel, humbled but resilient, had started a one-man consultancy operating from a converted guest house on his brother's property. His client list was short but growing. Small businesses that would never have rated his attention in his previous life. "He's different," Victor remarked after visiting his father. "Still driven, but the sharp edges are gone. He's actually listening to people now." I nodded, having witnessed the transformation myself during a surprisingly pleasant dinner where Nathaniel had sought my advice on a client proposal. He was earning respect the hard way now, through competence and character rather than connections and capital. 8 months into our new venture, an envelope arrived with a Swiss postmark. No return address, no note inside. Just a postcard featuring a photograph of the Starlight Gala where everything had begun. I recognized the shot immediately. It captured Bianca mid-toast, champagne glass raised, the moment before she had publicly humiliated Damien. Victor found me staring at it in our home office. "From Bianca?" he asked, recognizing his sister's distinctive handwriting on the address. I nodded. "No message." He studied the image. "What do you think it means?" I traced the edge of the postcard. "Recognition maybe. Understanding." The photograph represented the beginning of her downfall. A moment of arrogance that had triggered a cascade of consequences. By sending it, she acknowledged the symmetry, the justice of what had followed. I framed the postcard and placed it on my desk at Horizon Partners. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder that actions, however small, create ripples that eventually return to their source. Nearly a year after the car collapse, Zoe invited us to dinner at an exclusive rooftop restaurant. She arrived looking radiant, her gray hair elegantly styled, wearing a power suit that somehow managed to convey both authority and approachability. To the new CEO of Lambert Enterprises, Victor toasted, raising his glass. Zoe's smile was brilliant. "Dad's not fully retiring, of course. He'll remain chairman of the board, but day-to-day operations are mine now." It was a meteoric rise, though anyone who knew Zoe understood it was earned through years of diligent work rather than nepotism. Damien hadn't handed her the company, he'd prepared her to earn it. "Your idea for integrating Horizon Partners as our strategic development arm is brilliant," she told me over dessert. The board approved it unanimously. The partnership would expand our reach exponentially while maintaining our independence. The perfect balance of growth and control. As we discussed details, I marveled at how naturally Zoe wore her new authority. She'd always been kind, but now her kindness was backed by the kind of power usually reserved for those who'd sacrificed their humanity to obtain it. "By the way," she added as we were preparing to leave, "I'm getting married." The announcement was so casual I almost missed it. "What? To whom?" "James Porter." She blushed slightly. "He teaches literature at Columbia. We met at a fundraiser last fall. Not a business merger, not a strategic alliance. Just love, simple and unencumbered by ulterior motives." The wedding was planned for summer, intimate and understated despite Zoe's wealth and position. No corporate sponsorships disguised as floral arrangements, no business deals sealed between ceremony and reception. On a perfect June day, we gathered in the sculpture garden of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Zoe glowed in a sleek ivory sheath, her hand steady in her father's as he walked her down the aisle. Damien, showing his age now but still formidable, beamed with naked pride. "Never thought I'd see the day," he murmured to me at the reception. "A Lambert marrying for love instead of leverage." I watched as Zoe and James shared their first dance, their movements perfectly synchronized despite having taken no lessons. "Times are changing. Thanks in no small part to you," Damien acknowledged, raising his glass slightly. As the evening progressed, I found myself standing with Zoe near the fountain, both of us slightly apart from the celebration, observing the happiness we'd helped create. "Remember when we met?" she asked. "At that awful Christmas party where Bianca accidentally spilled red wine on your white dress?" I laughed softly. "How could I forget? You appeared with club soda and a knowing look." "I recognized a kindred spirit," Zoe admitted. "Someone who saw through the facade but played the game anyway." She glanced around at the gathered guests, genuine friends rather than strategic connections. "Look where it got us." I followed her gaze to Victor, deep in conversation with James about some obscure literary theory, his face animated with genuine interest. To Nathaniel, showing photos of his community garden project to a retired judge. To Damien, contentedly watching his daughter's happiness. "Karma doesn't forget addresses," I whispered, an old saying of my father's that seemed particularly apt. Zoe squeezed my hand. "Neither do friends." As the orchestra struck up another waltz, Victor appeared at my side, hand extended in invitation. I stepped into his arms, moving across the floor with the ease of partners who had weathered storms together and emerged stronger. The past was behind us. The future, bright with possibility, unfurled before us like the path of moonlight on water. Illuminated, inviting and entirely our own. After 7 years of working multiple jobs to fund my husband's dream, He took me to court, encouraged by his mother, and mocked me in front of the entire courtroom. "She's only after my wealth," he smirked. "She never even worked a real job." But when I stood up and said, "Your Honor, I'd like to submit this prenup from Paris." "She's only after my wealth," Corbin smirked, his eyes cold as winter glass. "She never even worked a real job." The courtroom fell silent. 7 years of sacrifice reduced to mockery by the man I had given everything for. His mother Mia sat behind him, nodding smugly, her manicured nails tapping against the polished wooden bench. The expensive lawyer beside Corbin shuffled papers importantly while throwing condescending glances my way. I stood up, my legs trembling but my voice steady. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit this prenup from Paris." The gasps were audible. Corbin's face drained of color as memories of that drunken night in Montmartre suddenly sobered him 7 years too late. But before I tell you how this ends, let me tell you how it began. I was 28 when I met Corbin Reynolds at a mutual friend's dinner party. Back then I was Cora Matthews, rising star at Meridian Financial Group, with a corner office and a salary that turned heads. My boss had just recommended me for the executive training program, the first stepping stone to senior management. "You're going places, Matthews," he'd said that very morning. "Not many analysts get this opportunity before 30. That night at the party, Corbin talked about his tech startup idea with such passion that the entire room gravitated toward him. An inventory management system that would revolutionize small businesses, he claimed. His eyes sparkled when he detailed the algorithms, the market potential, the future he envisioned. "The problem is capital," he confided later when we were alone on the balcony. "No one wants to invest in an unproven concept." 3 months into our whirlwind romance, Corbin's laptop died. The one containing all his coding work. He couldn't afford to replace it. I bought him a new one without hesitation. "You're investing in our future," he said, kissing me. "I'll pay you back tenfold." By 6 months, Corbin had quit his IT consulting job to focus on his startup full-time. His savings dwindled rapidly while investor meetings yielded nothing but empty promises. I started covering more of our shared expenses, then his rent, then his car payment. "It's temporary," he assured me over discount ramen dinners. "Once we get the seed money, everything changes." 1 year in, we were engaged and I faced a decision. Meridian was transferring their executive trainees to London for a year-long intensive program. Going meant climbing faster up the corporate ladder. Staying meant supporting Corbin's dream. "I'd understand if you went," he said, but his slumped shoulders told a different story. I declined the transfer. 2 weeks later, my position was restructured. A polite corporate way of showing me the door. "Maybe it's a blessing in disguise," Corbin suggested, holding me while I cried. "Now you can help me build our company." What followed was a descent I never imagined. First, I took a position as an administrative assistant at half my former salary. When that wasn't enough to cover Corbin's prototype development costs, I picked up weekend shifts at Riverdale Diner. Soon I was driving for share ride on weeknights after my day job ended. My old colleagues would sometimes slide into my car, their embarrassed recognition painful. "Cora, I thought you were on the executive track." I'd smile and explain about supporting my fiancé's startup, how I was investing in our future. They'd nod sympathetically, but I recognized the pity in their eyes. Meanwhile, Corbin worked 18-hour days in our apartment, emerging only for coffee and occasional food. On the rare nights we were both home, he'd talk excitedly about coding breakthroughs and potential investors while I soaked my swollen feet and calculated how to stretch our budget another month. We married at the courthouse with only his mother Mia in attendance. My family couldn't understand why I'd abandoned my career for a man with pie-in-the-sky ideas, as my father put it. "You're throwing away everything you worked for," my sister warned during our last real conversation. Mia never approved of me. From the beginning, her thin-lipped smile communicated her belief that her son had married beneath him. "Corbin needs a partner who understands his genius," she'd say, examining my waitress uniform with poorly concealed disdain. "Someone who can match his ambition." For our honeymoon, Corbin unexpectedly announced we were going to Paris. He'd secured a meeting with a French investor and convinced them to cover our travel expenses. "We deserve this break," he insisted, though I knew we couldn't afford it. Paris was beautiful but strained. Corbin spent most days in meetings while I wandered the city alone. On our third night, his investor meeting went exceptionally well, culminating in a celebratory dinner where Corbin drank far too much champagne. While he slept off his excitement in our hotel room, I made a decision. I'd supported his dream, sacrificed my career, worked 3 jobs simultaneously, but I needed protection. A business-savvy American expat I'd met at a cafe recommended her lawyer friend who specialized in international contracts. The next morning, while Corbin recovered with aspirin and coffee, I met with Monsieur Beaumont. Together, we drafted a prenuptial agreement acknowledging my financial contributions to the startup entitled me to 49% ownership. We included a clause recognizing my sweat equity, the years of multiple jobs supporting us while Corbin developed his company. That evening, amid more celebration and flowing wine, I presented the document as investment paperwork the French investor had requested. Corbin, too intoxicated to read the fine print, signed with a flourish. "To our future," he toasted, completely unaware of what he'd agreed to. Back home the pattern continued. I worked, he coded. Slowly, incrementally, his business gained traction. A small investment here, a beta tester there. After 3 years of struggle, Restock Solutions finally secured its first paying client. As business improved, our relationship deteriorated. Corbin started staying at the office overnight, claiming deadlines. He hired an assistant, Rebecca, whose qualifications seemed more aesthetic than professional. Mia became increasingly present in our lives, often dropping by the office to help with client relations. "You wouldn't understand the business aspects," she told me when I questioned a decision. "Best leave that to those who know." By year 5, I was still working multiple jobs despite the company's growing success. Corbin insisted all profits be reinvested. Our apartment remained small, our car secondhand, our lifestyle modest, sacrifices for the greater goal, he said. But I noticed changes. His clothes improved. His watch. His haircut. Small luxuries he justified as necessary for client impressions, while I continued wearing thrift store finds to my 3 jobs. "Be patient," he'd say, barely looking up from his phone. "We're almost there." By the 7th year, I barely recognized either of us. The ambitious financial analyst and passionate entrepreneur had been replaced by an exhausted worker and an increasingly distant CEO who now called himself Sieur in business settings. The distance between us grew until we were strangers sharing an address. I became invisible, my sacrifices, my contributions, my very presence fading into the background of Corbin's increasingly successful story. I never imagined the final chapter would begin in a courtroom with my husband's cruel smirk and his shocking words. "She never even worked a real job." Everything shifted on a Tuesday in March. I remember because I had just finished a double shift at the diner when Corbin called, his voice electric with excitement. "We got it, Cora. Venture capital funding, $8 million. His words tumbled out breathlessly. "Anderson Partners is backing us. We're scaling up immediately." I sank onto a bench outside the diner, my tired brain struggling to process what this meant. For 7 years we'd scraped by on promises and potential. Now suddenly it was real. "Does this mean I can quit one of my jobs?" I asked, hope rising in my chest for the first time in years. A brief pause. "Let's not be hasty. We need to reinvest everything for maximum growth. But soon, I promise." 2 weeks later, Restock Solutions moved from our spare bedroom to actual office space in the Westbrook Business Park. Corbin hired developers, marketers, and sales staff. He started wearing tailored suits and coming home with stories about business lunches at restaurants I couldn't afford to eat at. Then came Rebecca. "She's the best executive assistant in the industry," Corbin explained over a rare dinner together. "Her organizational skills are exactly what I need to manage everything." Rebecca Morgan was 27, Stanford-educated, with gleaming chestnut hair and a wardrobe of sleek pantsuits. When I first met her at the company's office warming party, she assessed me with cool professionalism. "Oh, you're Corbin's wife. How fascinating to meet you." Her smile never reached her eyes. "He rarely mentions his personal life at the office." The comment stung more than it should have. I was wearing my best dress, 3 years old and purchased on clearance, while carrying a tray of homemade appetizers I'd stayed up until 2 a.m. preparing between shifts. "Cora likes keeping things simple," Corbin interjected, gently taking the tray from me. "Rebecca, could you show her where to set up the food? I need to greet the investors." I became the wife that evening, introduced briefly, then politely relegated to the background while Corbin shone at the center of his newly expanding universe. Mia arrived fashionably late, embracing her son with theatrical affection before turning to assess the gathering. "Darling, this is just the beginning," she gushed, adjusting his tie. "I knew you were destined for greatness." She acknowledged me with a brisk nod. The cheese plate needs refreshing." "Be a dear." I bit back my response, reminding myself this was Corbin's moment. But something shifted that night. For the first time I felt like an outsider looking in. The following months brought rapid change. Corbin hired a CFO despite my finance background and experience managing the company's books for years. "We need someone with enterprise-level experience," he explained dismissively when I questioned the decision. "You've done your best, but we're in the big leagues now." My suggestions about financial strategy were increasingly met with patronizing smiles or outright dismissal. Meanwhile, Mia began appearing at the office regularly, attending meetings and offering opinions on everything from marketing strategies to office decor. "Mother has excellent taste and knows the right people," Corbin defended when I questioned her involvement. "Her connections are opening doors for us." Those doors remained firmly closed to me. When I stopped by the office one afternoon, bringing lunch for Corbin as a surprise, I found the reception area transformed. Previously bare walls now displayed framed photos documenting the company's journey. Corbin pitching to investors. Corbin signing the funding deal. Corbin cutting the ribbon on the new office. Corbin accepting a local business award. 7 years of history, carefully curated to erase any trace of my contribution. "Can I help you?" Rebecca's voice was professionally polite as she emerged from her office adjacent to Corbin's. "I'm here to see my husband," I replied, suddenly feeling like I needed an appointment. "He's in meetings all afternoon. Perhaps you should have called first." At home, Corbin began working later and later. His explanations evolved from apologetic to matter-of-fact to irritated when questioned. "Building a company requires sacrifice, Cora. Surely you understand that." One night, exhausted from my shifts, I fell asleep on the couch waiting for him. His phone, left behind in his rush that morning, pinged with a message that lit up the screen. "Rebecca, working late again tonight. Ordered dinner from Maison. Your favorite booth in the back." I scrolled up, my stomach tightening. Dozens of exchanges increasingly familiar. Inside jokes. Compliments. Late-night messages no executive assistant needed to send. When confronted, Corbin's denial came too quickly. "She's being professional, anticipating my needs. That's literally her job." At midnight, commenting on how good you looked in your blue suit. His expression hardened. "You're being ridiculous. This is why I can't discuss business with you. You're too emotional, too small-minded." The man who once valued my financial acumen now spoke to me as if I were a child. The shift was subtle at first, a condescending tone here and eye roll there, but it accelerated rapidly. My birthday passed without acknowledgement. Our anniversary became just another Tuesday. When his company was featured in a regional business magazine, my name wasn't mentioned once in the 4-page spread celebrating his solo journey to success. "They interviewed you for 3 hours, I said, staring at the glossy photos of Corbin, Rebecca, and Mia posed in the gleaming office. "You never mention me once?" He shrugged, barely glancing up from his laptop. "It wasn't relevant to the business narrative." 7 years of my life dismissed as irrelevant. The final confirmation came when I borrowed his laptop to pay our bills, something I still handled despite the company's success. A document was minimized in the corner. A lease agreement for a luxury apartment downtown, effective immediately. That night, Corbin didn't come home until 3 a.m. When he did, he smelled of expensive perfume and rehearsed excuses. "This isn't working anymore," he said flatly the next morning. "We want different things. Or you and Rebecca." His silence was answer enough. 2 days later he moved out. 3 weeks after that, divorce papers arrived while I was tying my apron for my diner shift. The grounds cited? Irreconcilable differences. The terms offered? A generous one-time settlement that amounted to less than 6 months of his new salary. When I called Corbin in disbelief, Mia answered his phone. "He's very busy," she said, satisfaction evident in her voice. "The lawyers will handle everything from here." Though frankly, dear, you should be grateful for his generosity. What exactly did you contribute besides being a temporary support system? As I hung up, I remembered the prenup from Paris, still sealed in its envelope and hidden in my old financial textbook from college. The one book Corbin would never think to open. The prenup felt heavy in my hands as I slid it back into the textbook. For a moment I hesitated. Was I really ready to go to war with the man I had once loved enough to sacrifice everything for? My phone buzzed with a text from my diner manager asking if I could cover an extra shift. The irony wasn't lost on me, still scrambling for hours while my husband leased luxury apartments. That night I made a decision. Before lawyers and courtrooms, Corbin deserved one last chance to do the right thing. I deserved one last chance to look him in the eyes when he refused. I arrived at Restock Solutions just after 6, when most employees would be gone. The receptionist, someone I'd never met, looked startled when I walked in. "I'm sorry, we're closed for appointments. You'll need to. I'm here to see Corbin Reynolds. I'm his wife." Her eyes widened slightly. "Oh. I didn't realize. Let me see if he's available." 5 minutes later, I was ushered into a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Corbin sat behind an enormous desk, his expression carefully neutral. "This is unexpected," he said, not bothering to stand. "I thought we agreed to communicate through our attorneys." "No, you decided that." "I never agreed to anything." I remained standing, refusing the chair he half-heartedly gestured toward. "I want to hear it from you directly. After everything we've been through, after everything I sacrificed." "Here we go again with the sacrifices," he sighed, checking his watch. "Nobody forced you to work those jobs, Cora. You didn't force me, but you sure were happy to benefit from them. 7 years, Corbin. I put you through 7 years of startup life. And I'm compensating you fairly for that time. The settlement offer is more than generous." I laughed, the sound hollow even to my own ears. 6 months of your salary for 7 years of my life. That's your definition of generous. What exactly do you think you're entitled to? His voice took on an edge. You didn't code anything. You didn't pitch to investors. You didn't build client relationships. I kept a roof over our heads. I paid for the prototypes, the equipment, the conferences. Small contributions in the grand scheme. The casual dismissal felt like a physical blow. In that moment I realized the man I married was truly gone. Or perhaps he'd never existed at all. "Are you sleeping with Rebecca?" I asked bluntly. His momentary hesitation told me everything. "My personal life is no longer your concern," he replied coldly. "It became my concern when you were still sharing my bed while pursuing her. Was she the reason for all those late meetings?" Corbin stood abruptly. "I don't have to justify myself to you. Rebecca understands what it takes to build something meaningful. She supports my vision without constant complaints about money or attention. I supported your vision when it was nothing but lines of code on a second-hand laptop. I supported you when we ate ramen for dinner 4 nights a week so you could buy server space." The door opened before he could respond. Mia stood there, her perfect blowout and designer suit making me acutely aware of my waitress uniform. "I thought I heard raised voices," she said, eyes narrowing at me. "Corbin, you shouldn't be speaking to her alone. That's what we're paying the attorneys for." "We?" I echoed. "Since when are you paying for anything, Mia?" She stepped fully into the room, closing the door behind her. "I have always been my son's strongest advocate. Something you clearly failed at." "She was just leaving," Corbin said dismissively. Mia placed a manicured hand on her son's shoulder. "Darling, this is exactly what I warned you about. The moment you achieved success, she shows up making demands." "I'm making demands?" I was incredulous. "I came here hoping for an honest conversation with my husband." "Ex-husband," Mia corrected smoothly. "Or very soon to be. The papers have been filed." "I'm aware. They were served to me between shifts at one of those jobs you both seem to think don't qualify as real work." Corbin at least had the decency to look slightly embarrassed. "The timing wasn't intentional." "Nothing ever is with you, is it?" I moved toward the door, then paused. "Just tell me one thing. Was any of it real? Did you ever actually love me, or was I just a convenient funding source until something better came along?" His eyes met mine briefly, then slid away. "We wanted different things. It's that simple." "Such a shame," Mia added, unable to resist twisting the knife. All those years wasted on someone who clearly wasn't your equal. But you've upgraded nicely. As if on cue, Rebecca appeared in the doorway, her expression shifting from confusion to cool assessment when she saw me. Sorry to interrupt. The investors are on the conference line. We'll be right there, Corbin replied, gratitude for the interruption evident in his voice. I looked between the three of them, my husband, his mother, his mistress, and felt something break free inside me. Not my heart, that had been breaking slowly for months. This was different. This was the last thread of hope that there might be some amicable resolution, some acknowledgement of our shared history. Goodbye, Corbin, I said quietly, walking past Rebecca without a second glance. That night, I sat alone in what had once been our apartment, surrounded by the modest furnishings we'd collected over 7 years of struggle. Photos still hung on the walls, evidence of happier times, of the dreams we'd shared. I took them down one by one. For 3 days I moved through my shifts mechanically, serving food, taking orders, driving strangers across town, all while a storm raged inside me. Disbelief gave way to crushing sadness, then to something I hadn't expected: anger. Not just at Corbin or Mia or Rebecca, but at myself. For believing in someone who saw me as nothing more than a stepping stone. For shrinking myself to fit into the space he'd allowed me. For forgetting my own worth. On the 4th day I called in sick to all 3 jobs. Instead, I visited the college library where I'd once studied finance, where ambitious, confident Cora Matthews had planned her rise through the corporate world before she met Corbin Reynolds. I opened my old textbook and removed the Paris prenup from its hiding place. Then I called the number of an attorney a regular customer at the diner had once given me, just in case. Marilyn Chin answered on the 2nd ring. "This is Cora Reynolds," I said, my voice steadier than it had been in weeks. "I understand you specialize in divorce cases involving businesses and hidden assets." "I do," she replied. "Why don't you tell me your situation?" As I began to explain, I felt something shifting inside me, the first sparks of determination replacing the ashes of what had been. This wasn't just about money or revenge. This was about reclaiming 7 years of erased contributions. About standing up and being counted. About becoming visible again. Marilyn Chin was everything I needed in a lawyer. Sharp, uncompromising, and undeterred by Corbin's growing status in the business community. Unfortunately, her expertise came with a price tag that threatened to deplete my meager savings within weeks. "I can offer you a payment plan," she suggested during our 2nd meeting, her eyes softening briefly. "But I won't sugarcoat this. Going up against a well-funded opponent is challenging." "I've been living on challenging for 7 years," I replied. "I'm not backing down now." When the first court date arrived, I'd pawned my engagement ring to cover Marilyn's retainer. The small diamond had once seemed like the most precious thing in the world. Corbin had saved for months to buy it. Now it represented just another sacrifice in a long line of them. I arrived at the courthouse 30 minutes early, dressed in the only business suit I owned, purchased for interviews long before I'd met Corbin. It was slightly outdated and a bit too loose after years of running between jobs had whittled away at my frame. Marilyn met me on the courthouse steps, her sleek briefcase and confident stride a stark contrast to my nervous energy. "Remember what we discussed," she said quietly as we walked through security. "Stay calm, answer only what's asked, and let me handle the objections." We were the first to arrive in the assigned courtroom, a tactical decision on Marilyn's part to help settle my nerves. 20 minutes later, the doors swung open with theatrical timing. Corbin entered first, wearing what I recognized as a custom-tailored suit that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. Behind him strode a phalanx of 4 attorneys, each carrying identical leather portfolios embossed with the gold logo of Harrington and Walsh, one of the city's most prestigious law firms. Rebecca followed, dressed in a conservative navy dress that successfully communicated professional colleague rather than other woman. Her eyes met mine briefly before sliding away. Last came Mia, her entrance carefully calculated for maximum impact in her cream designer suit and pearl earrings. She placed a protective hand on Corbin's shoulder as they took their seats, deliberately angling her body to create a visual barrier between us. "Well," Marilyn murmured, "they certainly want to put on a show." Judge Eleanor Mackenzie entered the courtroom precisely at 9. In her mid-60s with silver hair pulled into a severe bun, she commanded immediate respect with a single stern glance across the room. Let's dispense with unnecessary theatrics, she announced after the preliminary introductions. Reynolds versus Reynolds, petition for dissolution of marriage. I've reviewed the initial filings. Mr. Harrington, you may begin. Lawrence Harrington, senior partner and lead counsel for Corbin, approached the podium with the confidence of a man who'd never lost a case. Your Honor, this is a straightforward matter. My client, Corbin Reynolds, founder and CEO of Restock Solutions, is seeking an equitable dissolution of his marriage to Cora Reynolds. We've offered a generous settlement that Mrs. Reynolds has inexplicably rejected. We reject the characterization of generous, Your Honor, Marilyn countered immediately. My client contributed substantially to building Mr. Reynolds' business over 7 years of marriage. The proposed settlement represents a fraction of her rightful share. Harrington's smile didn't reach his eyes. Perhaps we should establish exactly what contributions Mrs. Reynolds made to her husband's business success. What followed was a systematic dismantling of my work history. Harrington called Corbin to the stand first, establishing his credentials as a visionary entrepreneur who built something from nothing through sheer determination and brilliance. When the questioning turned to me, the tone shifted dramatically. Mr. Reynolds, what employment did your wife maintain during your marriage? Corbin cleared his throat. Cora worked various jobs, mostly service positions. Could you be more specific? She was a waitress at Riverdale Diner. She drove for a rideshare company. She did some bookkeeping for small businesses. And did she have any formal role at Restock Solutions? No, Corbin replied. She helped with some basic accounting in the very beginning, but we outgrew her skill level quickly. Each word landed like a slap. 7 years of my life reduced to various jobs and skills that were quickly outgrown. When it was my turn to take the stand, Harrington approached with practiced sympathy. Mrs. Reynolds, could you tell the court your current employment situation? I currently work 3 jobs. I'm an administrative assistant at Westbrook Medical Center during the day, I waitress 4 evenings a week, and I drive for share ride on weekends. And your annual income from these combined positions? I swallowed hard. Approximately $43,000 last year. Less than 1/10 of your husband's current salary, Harrington observed. Would you say financial considerations played a role in your marriage to Mr. Reynolds? Marilyn objected immediately. Argumentative and offensive, Your Honor. Sustained, Judge Mackenzie agreed, eyeing Harrington coolly. Counsel will refrain from insinuations. But the damage was done. The narrative was being carefully constructed. Corbin the brilliant provider, me the underemployed wife seeking a payday. The questioning continued relentlessly, picking apart every financial decision, every career choice I'd made. Why had I left Meridian Financial? Why hadn't I pursued other opportunities in finance? Wasn't it true that I'd chosen these menial jobs because they were less demanding? By lunchtime I was exhausted. In the courthouse bathroom I splashed cold water on my face, trying to compose myself for the afternoon session. You're doing well, Marilyn assured me. The judge isn't buying their character assassination. She's been watching you carefully. The afternoon brought Mia to the stand, perfectly coiffed and rehearsed. Mrs. Reynolds, how would you characterize your son's marriage? Mia adjusted her pearls. Corbin is exceptionally generous. He supported Cora's choices, even when they limited their lifestyle. He never pressured her to find more suitable employment. And did you observe Mrs. Reynolds contributing to your son's business success? Not in any meaningful way, Mia replied with practiced regret. Corbin built that company through countless sleepless nights and brilliant innovation. Cora seemed content to remain on the periphery. Her testimony continued, painting a portrait of a young entrepreneur burdened by an unambitious wife who then had the audacity to claim credit for his success. She always seemed fascinated by the potential financial rewards, Mia added, unprompted. Always asking about investors and funding rather than the technology itself. By late afternoon, the atmosphere in the courtroom was stifling. Judge Mackenzie called a brief recess before closing arguments. We're not waiting anymore, I whispered to Marilyn. I want to present the prenup now. We agreed to hold it for rebuttal. They're burying me. I can't sit through another hour of this. When proceedings resumed, Harrington launched into a practice summation. The judge listened impassively until Corbin suddenly interrupted his own attorney. Your Honor, may I speak directly? he asked with the confidence of someone unused to being refused. Judge Mackenzie raised an eyebrow but nodded. Corbin turned slightly, ensuring his profile was directed toward me, but his words carried to the entire courtroom. I built something meaningful. Something that employs 30 people and helps hundreds of small businesses. I did that. Not Cora. His voice hardened. She's only after my wealth. She never even worked a real job. The courtroom fell silent. 7 years of sacrifice reduced to mockery by the man I had given everything for. His mother Mia sat behind him, nodding smugly, her manicured nails tapping against the polished wooden bench. I stood up, my legs trembling but my voice steady. Your Honor, I'd like to submit this prenup from Paris. The manila envelope felt warm in my hands as I passed it to Marilyn, who approached the bench with measured steps. Judge Mackenzie accepted the document with a raised eyebrow. A prenuptial agreement? She asked, examining the first page. Mr. Harrington, were you aware of this document's existence? The attorney's composure slipped momentarily as he glanced back at Corbin, whose expression had transformed from smug confidence to dawning horror. Your Honor, this is the first we're hearing of any prenuptial agreement. We question its authenticity and relevance at this late stage. Marilyn smiled thinly. The document is dated and notarized in Paris, France, 7 years ago during the couple's honeymoon. It bears Mr. Reynolds' signature, which can be verified by the court's expert if necessary. Judge Mackenzie adjusted her glasses, scanning the pages with increasing interest. This appears to be in order. Would you care to summarize the relevant portions for the court, Ms. Chen? Certainly, Your Honor. The prenuptial agreement explicitly acknowledges my client's financial contributions to the founding of Restock Solutions. It categorizes these contributions as sweat equity and establishes Mrs. Reynolds as a 49% owner of the company and all related intellectual property. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Across the aisle, Corbin's face had drained of color. He whispered frantically to Harrington, who appeared equally blindsided. Mia's perfectly manicured hand flew to her throat, her expression oscillating between disbelief and outrage. Furthermore, Marilyn continued over the commotion, the agreement contains a clause that in the event of divorce, Mrs. Reynolds' ownership stake would be recognized independently from any divorce settlement. Judge Mackenzie silenced the room with a single sharp rap of her gavel. Mr. Reynolds, do you recognize your signature on this document? Corbin stood slowly, tugging at his collar. Your Honor, I may have signed something in Paris, but I wasn't fully aware of the contents. It was our honeymoon. There was champagne involved. Are you suggesting you were intoxicated when you signed a legal document, Mr. Reynolds? The judge's tone made it clear this wasn't a favorable defense. Not intoxicated perhaps, but not fully cognizant of what I was signing. I couldn't help but speak up. He was sober enough to meet with investors that same day and secure our first round of funding. Judge Mackenzie nodded thoughtfully. Ms. Chin, please continue. Marilyn proceeded to enumerate the years of multiple jobs I had worked, the specific amounts I had contributed to business expenses, and the unpaid hours I had devoted to bookkeeping and administrative support during the company's earliest days. Mrs. Reynolds didn't simply support her husband emotionally, Your Honor. She financially underwrote his dream while working 3 jobs simultaneously. Restock Solutions exists today because of her sacrifice and direct financial investment. For the next 20 minutes, the courtroom was transformed. No longer was I the gold-digging wife seeking an unearned payday. Instead, the portrait emerging was of a woman who had invested years of labor and thousands of dollars into a partnership, only to be erased from the narrative once success arrived. Judge Mackenzie listened intently, occasionally directing questions to both attorneys. As Marilyn concluded her presentation, the judge removed her glasses and addressed the courtroom. I'm recessing for 30 minutes to review this document thoroughly. When we reconvene, I'll deliver my preliminary ruling on property division and ownership recognition. Her gaze swept across Corbin's legal team. I suggest you use this time to confer with your client about a more realistic approach to settlement. In the hallway outside, Marilyn squeezed my arm gently. That went better than we could have hoped. The judge clearly sees the inequity here. Before I could respond, Harrington approached, his earlier confidence noticeably diminished. Miss Chin, Mrs. Reynolds, a word? He glanced around, ensuring privacy. My client is prepared to offer a significantly improved settlement if you're willing to negotiate outside the courtroom. I thought of all the nights I'd driven strangers across town while Corbin worked on his code. The holidays I'd missed with family because I couldn't afford time off from multiple jobs. The dreams I'd deferred while nurturing his. 49%, I replied calmly. That's not negotiable. But I'm willing to discuss terms for how we structure the business relationship moving forward. When we reconvened, Judge Mackenzie didn't waste time on preamble. Having reviewed the prenuptial agreement, I find it valid and binding. Mrs. Reynolds is hereby recognized as owning 49% of Restock Solutions and all related assets. She peered at Corbin over her glasses. Mr. Reynolds, the court takes a dim view of attempts to mischaracterize marital contributions, particularly when documented evidence contradicts those claims. Across the aisle, Mia clutched her pearls so tightly I feared they might snap. Rebecca stared straight ahead, carefully avoiding eye contact with anyone. Corbin himself seemed to have aged years in a single afternoon, the confidential replaced by a man confronting the consequences of his own actions. Furthermore, the judge continued, given Mrs. Reynolds' significant ownership stake in a growing company, I'm denying the motion for spousal support as unnecessary. The parties will attend mediation to determine how to structure their business relationship moving forward, or alternatively, to negotiate a buyout of Mrs. Reynolds' interest at fair market value. As we left the courtroom, I felt strangely hollow. The victory was complete, the vindication absolute. But 7 years of my life had still been reduced to percentages and dollar amounts. No legal ruling could restore the trust one had lost, not just in Corbin but in my own judgment. Outside on the courthouse steps, reporters had gathered, alerted to the unexpected twist in what had appeared to be a routine divorce case. Marilyn fielded their questions expertly while I stood silently beside her, still processing the day's events. Mrs. Reynolds, how does it feel to be revealed as the hidden partner behind Restock Solutions' success? One reporter called out. Before I could answer, a familiar voice cut through the crowd. Cora isn't speaking today, Corbin announced, emerging from the courthouse with his entourage. This is a private matter that we'll resolve professionally. I met his gaze directly for the first time since his courtroom outburst. Actually, I think I've been silent long enough. Turning to the reporters, I spoke with a clarity that surprised even me. Restock Solutions was built on partnership, sacrifice, and shared vision. I look forward to its continued success. Whether I remain involved or not will depend on how genuine the commitment to partnership proves to be moving forward. 1 year later, I stood at the window of my downtown office, watching the city lights flicker on as dusk settled. After months of tense negotiation, Corbin and I had reached an agreement. A structured buyout of my ownership stake, with payments spread over 5 years to avoid destabilizing the company. The terms were favorable enough to allow me to launch Matthews Financial Advisors, specializing in helping women entrepreneurs secure funding and protect their interests. The irony wasn't lost on me. My years of struggling alongside Corbin had given me an education no business school could provide. My assistant knocked gently before entering. Your 5 o'clock is here. And these just arrived. She placed a bouquet of lilies on my desk alongside a small envelope. Inside was a brief note. Congratulations on the Forbes feature. You deserve the recognition. See. The magazine had named me one of their entrepreneurs to watch, highlighting both my new venture and the story behind it. The article had been fair to both Corbin and me, acknowledging his technical brilliance while crediting my financial stewardship during the critical early years. I didn't respond to the note. Some bridges, once burned, are better left as monuments to lessons learned. But I kept the flowers. That evening, as I met friends for dinner, real friends who had stood by me through the darkest days, I found myself genuinely laughing for perhaps the first time in years. The weight that had pressed upon me for so long had finally lifted. I had reclaimed not just my financial worth, but something far more valuable, my voice. And this time I wouldn't let anyone silence it again. My husband's mistress showed up at our anniversary dinner wearing the diamond bracelet meant for me. Surprise, darling, she smirked, expecting me to break down. Instead, I calmly pulled out a USB drive. The prenup has an infidelity clause, I said, and my investigator has proof. His face went pale as waiters became witnesses. I stood in front of the full-length mirror, A vision in midnight blue silk that hugged my figure in all the right places. At 45 I still turned heads, though lately the only head I wanted to turn belonged to my husband, Dominic. That hadn't happened in a while. Tonight was our 20th anniversary, and I'd chosen this dress deliberately, sophisticated but powerful. Not the vulnerable red number Dominic had suggested I wear. He always did prefer me looking soft, pliable. "You look stunning, Mrs. Reynolds," our housekeeper Martha said from the doorway. "Thank you," I replied, fastening diamond studs to my ears. My neck remained bare, waiting for the diamond bracelet Dominic had poorly hidden in his desk drawer 3 weeks ago. I'd found it while searching for something else entirely: evidence. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to thank each of you for being part of this incredible journey. If you're enjoying these stories of calculated revenge and personal empowerment, consider subscribing. It's completely free and helps us continue sharing tales of women who refuse to be underestimated. Now, let's watch as Holly transforms 20 years of betrayal into the perfect anniversary surprise. My hands trembled slightly as I applied my lipstick. Not from nervousness, but from a cold, calculated anger that had been building for 6 months. I steadied them, reminding myself that tonight required absolute control. Control had become my closest companion lately. I remembered the exact moment everything changed. It was a Tuesday in January, rain pattering against the windows of our company's downtown office. As Chief Financial Officer of Reynolds Enterprises, though my official title was Vice President because Dominic thought CFO sounded too intimidating for a woman, I'd been reviewing quarterly expense reports. A $12,000 charge from Cartier flagged my attention. No business reason, no client gift notation. Strange timing, I thought. My birthday had passed, Christmas was months away, and our anniversary wasn't until July. When I casually mentioned it over dinner, Dominic's explanation came too quickly: client appreciation gift for the Hendersons. Margaret loves Cartier. I'd nodded, smile fixed in place. The next day I called Margaret Henderson myself, asking about her beautiful new Cartier piece, under the guise of wanting to get something similar. Her confusion confirmed my suspicions. That evening I accessed Dominic's email when he was in the shower. His password hadn't changed in years. Holly Baby 2004, our wedding year. The man could build a technology empire but couldn't bother with password security. The confirmation came in the form of an email receipt, followed by a thread between Dominic and my executive assistant, Jessica Parker. "She'll love it," Jessica had written. "Almost as much as I love what you got me last month." Their exchanges were nauseating in their intimacy. Jessica, 28, brilliant, ambitious. I'd hired her myself 2 years ago, mentored her, shared business strategies over late-night takeout in the office. All while she was sleeping with my husband. A car horn outside pulled me back to the present. Dominic was already downstairs, probably checking his watch impatiently. I took one final look in the mirror, picked up the small clutch containing the USB drive and squared my shoulders. "Game time," I whispered to my reflection. "Reservations are at 8, Holly," Dominic called up the stairs. "We don't want to be late." The irony wasn't lost on me. Dominic Reynolds, chronically late to family dinners and school events, suddenly concerned about punctuality. But tonight was special. He'd reserved the private dining room at La Maison, the most exclusive restaurant in the city. A room that, unbeknownst to him, I'd called ahead to modify. More tables had been added around ours, filled with random diners, who were actually business associates, friends, and 2 journalists from the business section of the Tribune. People whose opinion of Dominic mattered. The drive downtown was filled with meaningless small talk. Dominic was animated, almost giddy, praising my appearance with an enthusiasm that once would have warmed my heart. Now I recognized it as performance. The same charm he turned on for board meetings and investor pitches. "You really outdid yourself with this reservation," I said, gazing out at the Chicago skyline. "La Maison on a Friday night? Must have pulled some strings." "Only the best for our 20th, he replied, reaching for my hand. I let him take it, noticing how his thumb caressed my bare wrist. "I have something special for you. Something worthy of the woman behind the man." The phrase made my stomach turn. Behind the man. As if I hadn't built Reynolds Enterprises alongside him. As if my business degree and financial acumen hadn't saved the company during the recession while Dominic was busy whining and dining clients. The restaurant was a golden glow of chandeliers and candlelight. The maitre d' greeted us warmly, leading us to the modified private room where several tables were already occupied. Dominic frowned slightly at the change but quickly recovered his composure. Mr. Reynolds, our regular server Antonio, approached with champagne. And the lovely Mrs. Reynolds. Happy anniversary to you both. We clinked glasses and Dominic launched into reminiscing about our early days. How we'd met in college, how I'd believed in his vision when no one else did. It was a narrative he'd perfected over the years, painting himself as the visionary and me as the supportive wife. Never mentioning that it was my family's investment that launched the company, my connections that secured our first major clients. I was nodding along, playing my part when I felt the air in the room shift. Dominic's eyes moved past me, widening slightly, a micro-expression of panic quickly replaced by forced nonchalance. I didn't need to turn around to know. Jessica had arrived. She approached our table in a black dress that cost more than most junior executives make in a month. But it wasn't the dress that caught my attention. It was the diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist. My bracelet. The exact design I'd admired in a Cartier window 6 months ago while shopping with Dominic. Surprise, darling, she smirked, eyes fixed on me, clearly expecting a breakdown, a scene, tears, something to make me look unstable in front of everyone. Instead, I felt an odd sense of calm settle over me. The final piece had fallen into place. I'd suspected she might show up tonight. The hotel reservation in Dominic's name 3 blocks away was a clue, but the bracelet was an unexpected gift. Jessica, I said coolly, what a surprise. I don't recall seeing your name on the reservation. Dominic jumped in, his voice slightly higher than normal. Jessica was just dropping off some papers for Monday's presentation. Weren't you, Jessica? I watched her smile falter slightly. This wasn't the reaction she'd expected. That bracelet is stunning, I continued, my voice carrying across the now silent room. Cartier, isn't it? Exactly the one I pointed out last winter. Jessica's hand moved to cover the bracelet instinctively. Dominic's face had lost its color. With deliberate slowness, I reached into my clutch and extracted the small black USB drive, placing it on the table between us. The prenup has an infidelity clause, I said clearly, making sure everyone in the room could hear. And my investigator has proof, not just of this affair but of the 3 before it. And something far more interesting buried in the company financials. I turned to face our audience. Would anyone like to hear about the Reynolds Enterprises shadow accounts before the SEC does? Dominic's face went from pale to gray as waiters became witnesses to the public execution of his marriage, his reputation, and potentially his freedom. The silence that fell over the restaurant was deafening. I watched as Dominic's face contorted, his usual confident facade crumbling beneath the weight of exposure. 20 years of marriage flashed before my eyes. Not just the betrayal of the present moment, but the slow erosion of what we'd built together. Holly, please, he whispered, reaching for my hand. We can discuss this privately. I pulled away, my mind drifting back to Northwestern University, 1999. I was 22, a summa cum laude economics graduate with offers from 3 investment banks. Dominic was the charming business major with big dreams and mediocre grades, but when he spoke about technology ventures, his passion was infectious. When he proposed the summer after graduation, I shelved my Wall Street ambitions to support his vision for a tech startup. You're the brains, Holly Berry, he'd say in those early days, poring over business plans at our tiny kitchen table. I'm just the pretty face who'll sell it. It had been a joke then. It became our reality. There's nothing to discuss, I replied coldly, watching Jessica sink into a nearby chair, her earlier confidence evaporating. The time for discussion was before you gave my executive assistant my anniversary gift. The irony wasn't lost on me. Jessica was essentially a younger version of myself, ambitious, analytically brilliant, eager to prove herself. I'd recognized those qualities when I hired her, saw myself in her determination. I'd never imagined she would literally try to replace me in every aspect of my life. Reynolds Enterprises exists because of my family's seed money, I continued, my voice steady. My father's connections secured our first 3 clients. My economics background built the financial structure that saved us during the 2008 crash. Across the room, I noticed Bernard Wilson from the Chicago Business Journal scribbling notes. Good. Let there be a record. Year by year, I had gradually taken over the operational backbone of Reynolds Enterprises. While Dominic glad-handed clients and charmed investors, I developed the financial models that kept us profitable, restructured departments for efficiency, and quietly pioneered the data analytics division that now generated 60% of our revenue. Remember the Peterson acquisition? I asked, addressing the room as much as Dominic. The one that put us on the map nationally? Dominic's jaw tightened. He knew where this was going. I spent 6 months analyzing their vulnerabilities, structuring the perfect offer. I created the entire acquisition strategy. But who got the cover of Tech Innovators magazine? Who accepted the industry award? Holly, you never wanted the spotlight, he attempted, desperation creeping into his voice. No, I was told the spotlight wasn't my place, I corrected. That clients preferred dealing with you. That investors would be more comfortable with a male CEO. I turned to Jessica. Is that what he told you too? That you'd be the power behind the throne, making him look good while staying in the shadows? Her expression confirmed my suspicions. My stomach clenched, remembering the exact moment I'd realized Jessica wasn't just a mistress. She was my replacement in waiting. 3 months ago, I'd overheard Dominic on the phone in his home office. Once Holly's out of the picture, we'll restructure the executive team. You've already proven you can handle her responsibilities. I stood frozen outside the door, hand covering my mouth to prevent any sound escaping. The board trusts my judgment. They'll accept whatever narrative we give them. The next day, I contacted Patricia Monroe, the sharpest divorce attorney in Chicago. Our first meeting had been eye-opening. You're in a stronger position than you realize, Patricia had said, reviewing our prenuptial agreement. There's an infidelity clause Dominic probably forgot about. His father insisted on it, ironically to protect him from gold diggers. I remembered laughing bitterly at that. His father always did underestimate me. This clause entitles you to 50% of all assets plus an additional 10% of the company valuation for each proven instance of infidelity, Patricia continued. With proper evidence, you could own controlling interest in Reynolds Enterprises. That meeting changed everything. I went from devastated wife to strategic opponent, gathering evidence methodically while maintaining a perfect facade of ignorance. I hired Michael Dawson, a former FBI forensic accountant turned private investigator, who documented Dominic's rendezvous with Jessica and uncovered 3 previous affairs. More disturbing were the financial irregularities Michael found. Offshore accounts, questionable transfers, client funds temporarily borrowed, then replaced before quarterly audits. Mrs. Reynolds, Antonio the server approached our table tentatively, breaking my reverie. Would you like me to escort Miss Parker out? Before I could answer, Jessica stood up. This is ridiculous. Dominic, tell her the truth about us, about the company plans. Company plans? I raised an eyebrow. You mean the restructuring where I'm pushed out? Or perhaps the plan to attribute my analytics framework to yourself in next quarter's shareholder presentation? Her eyes widened. I'd accessed Dominic's cloud storage weeks ago, finding presentation drafts that credited Jessica with my innovations. The ultimate betrayal wasn't sexual. It was professional. 20 years of building something from nothing, only to be erased from its history. Holly, Dominic's voice dropped to a pleading whisper. Think about what you're doing. This company is our legacy. No, I corrected him, standing to address everyone present. Reynolds Enterprises was built on my ideas, my strategies, and my silent acceptance of staying in the background. That ends tonight. I turned to Bernard Wilson, the journalist. I have documentation of systematic financial improprieties at Reynolds Enterprises, orchestrated by CEO Dominic Reynolds. I'm prepared to provide full disclosure to regulatory authorities. Dominic's face drained of all remaining color. He knew exactly what I had found. You wouldn't, he whispered. Those were temporary measures. Everything was replaced. Just like I was to be replaced? I asked quietly, feeling the weight of 2 decades of being undervalued. You built our empire on sand, Dominic. And tonight the tide has come in. A wave of murmurs rippled through the restaurant as my words hung in the air. For a moment no one moved. I remained standing, shoulders back, the USB drive still on the table between us like a grenade with its pin pulled. You've made your point, Dominic finally said, his voice lowered but tinged with growing anger. Let's discuss this somewhere private. I shook my head slowly. Privacy has served your purposes for too long. Looking back, the drive to the restaurant had been a masterclass in irony. Dominic had been particularly attentive, his hand occasionally squeezing my knee as he drove through downtown Chicago, pointing out the new skyscraper being built by one of our clients. 20 years. He'd mused, genuine warmth in his voice. Remember our first anniversary? That tiny Italian place in Evanston when we could barely afford the bill? I had remembered, of course. Back then we truly were partners. I'd worn a dress I'd saved for 3 months to buy, and Dominic had presented me with a simple silver bracelet engraved with our initials. We'd dreamed together that night, planning our empire over cheap Chianti. The best is yet to come, Holly, he'd said in the car tonight, completely oblivious to what awaited him. I'd simply smiled and checked my lipstick in the visor mirror, mentally rehearsing my moves for the evening ahead. La Maison had been the perfect setting for tonight's revelation. Not just because of its reputation as Chicago's most exclusive restaurant, but because of how meticulously I'd planned the seating arrangements. I'd called the owner, Maurice, personally 3 weeks ago. Mrs. Reynolds, we had planned the small private dining room for your anniversary as Mr. Reynolds requested, Maurice had said. I'd prefer something more inclusive, I'd replied. Perhaps the large private room instead? With several tables. Of course, but your husband specifically requested privacy. It's my anniversary too, Maurice, I'd said softly. And I've prepared a surprise that requires an audience. A substantial donation to Morris's favorite charity had secured his cooperation. The guest list had been equally deliberate. Jonathan and Lisa Meyer, our oldest friends who'd been suspecting Dominic's infidelity for years. Richard Henderson, our largest investor. Bernard Wilson from the Chicago Business Journal. And Stephanie Winters, a senior partner at Goldman Sachs who'd been courting me to join their executive team for months. Now, as the reality of his situation sank in, Dominic's face shifted from shock to calculation. I recognized that look. He was formulating a counter-strategy, the same expression he wore during difficult board meetings. Ladies and gentlemen, he addressed the room with a forced chuckle, I apologize for this uncomfortable situation. My wife is understandably upset about a personal matter, but I'm afraid she's mixing business accusations with marital problems. Jessica remained frozen in her chair, the diamond bracelet glinting under the chandelier lights. Is that why you had me prepare financial documentation for the SEC investigation, Dominic? I asked loudly. As a personal matter? His smile faltered. 2 weeks ago I'd casually mentioned preparing documentation, just in case the SEC had questions about certain transactions. He dismissed my concerns, never suspecting I was the one who had anonymously tipped off the regulatory agency. Holly, you're making serious allegations without context, Dominic attempted, glancing nervously at Richard Henderson, whose investment firm controlled 20% of our company's shares. Perhaps we should review the context together, I suggested, picking up the USB drive and turning to our audience. 3 years ago, Dominic authorized the temporary borrowing of client development funds to cover personal real estate purchases. The money was returned before the quarterly audit, but the transaction records weren't completely erased. Richard Henderson's expression darkened. Is this true, Reynolds? Before Dominic could respond, Jessica suddenly found her voice. Holly, please. This isn't about the company. This is about your jealousy. Pie jealousy? I laughed, genuinely amused by her naivety. Jessica, do you think you're the first? The files on this drive document his affair with Claire from marketing in 2018, Melissa from the Denver office in 2020, and that lovely weekend in Miami with the pharmaceutical rep whose name he never bothered to learn. I turned my attention back to Dominic. Did you tell Jessica about the infidelity clause in our prenup? How each documented affair costs you an additional 10% of company shares. Dominic's expression confirmed he'd either forgotten or never bothered to read the fine print his father had insisted upon. The irony was delicious. The clause meant to protect the Reynolds fortune from a gold-digging wife would now transfer controlling interest to me. This is absurd, Dominic sputtered, but his trademark confidence was crumbling. Those financial moves were approved by the board. The board wasn't informed, I corrected calmly. I checked the minutes of every meeting for the past 5 years. You acted unilaterally, thinking no one would notice because you keep your wife, the financial expert, busy with operational details instead of governance. Jonathan Meyer, our longtime friend and a board member himself, leaned forward. Is that accurate, Dominic? The restaurant had fallen completely silent. Even the waitstaff stood motionless, caught in the drama unfolding before them. Antonio, our regular server, looked particularly stunned. He'd served us on countless date nights, anniversary celebrations, always the picture-perfect power couple. Throughout the confrontation, I maintained a composure that had taken months of preparation to achieve. I'd practiced this moment in front of my bathroom mirror, rehearsed my words while driving alone, trained myself to speak without my voice breaking. This calm wasn't natural. It was cultivated through countless sleepless nights when anger and heartbreak threatened to consume me. This USB contains copies of all relevant financial records, documented affairs, and evidence of corporate misconduct, I announced, placing it back on the table. My attorney has the originals with instructions to deliver them to the SEC, the board of directors, and the appropriate media outlets at 9 o'clock tonight unless I call to stop it. I checked my watch deliberately. That's 45 minutes from now. What do you want? Dominic finally asked, his voice barely audible. What I've earned, I replied simply. Controlling interest in the company I built, public acknowledgement of my contributions, and a divorce that reflects the true nature of our partnership. Jessica began to cry silently, the diamond bracelet now looking more like handcuffs than jewelry on her wrist. And Jessica, I added, unable to resist one final twist of the knife. He told Claire from marketing she was the love of his life too. Right before he replaced her with Melissa. Jessica wiped at her tears with a napkin, smearing expensive mascara across her cheekbones. The perfectly composed facade she'd worn upon arrival had completely disintegrated. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. This is extortion, Dominic said, finding his voice again as he glanced around at the witnesses I'd carefully assembled. His hand reached for his water glass, but it trembled so badly he knocked it over instead. Water cascaded across the white tablecloth, a small flood that no one moved to stop. No, Dominic, I corrected calmly. This is consequences. Richard Henderson stood up from his table, approaching ours with the deliberate pace of a man who controlled billions in investments. He'd known us for 15 years, had been one of our first major backers. I'd like to see what's on that drive, Holly, he said, ignoring Dominic completely. Richard, this is a private matter, Dominic began. Not when it involves company funds, it isn't, Richard cut him off sharply. Not when my investment firm has a fiduciary responsibility to our clients who've backed Reynolds Enterprises. He turned back to me. How long has this been going on? The financial irregularities? 3 years that I can document, I answered. The pattern of affairs? Nearly our entire marriage. Stephanie Winters from Goldman Sachs approached next, her expression a mixture of professional concern and personal sympathy. Holly, that executive position we discussed last month is still open if you're interested. I smiled, gratitude warming my chest. 3 weeks ago, I'd had lunch with Stephanie under the guise of discussing potential investment opportunities. What I'd really been doing was establishing a safety net, ensuring I had options regardless of tonight's outcome. This is ridiculous, Dominic snapped, desperation edging into his voice. Holly has clearly had some kind of breakdown. Jessica is my executive assistant. This is nothing more than paranoid accusations. Save it, Dom, Jonathan Meyer interrupted, coming to stand beside me. His wife Lisa followed, placing a supportive hand on my shoulder. We've known for years. We saw you with that marketing girl at the Christmas party in 2018. Lisa spotted you and Jessica at the Peninsula Hotel in April. And you didn't tell me? I asked, genuine surprise breaking through my composure for the first time that evening. Lisa squeezed my shoulder. We tried to hint at it, Holly, but you always changed the subject. We figured you either knew and were handling it your way or didn't want to know. I didn't want to know, I admitted quietly, until I couldn't ignore it anymore. The revelation that my closest friends had seen the signs long before I acknowledged them hit me harder than I expected. All those sympathetic glances, the careful avoidance of certain topics, the extra invitations to girls' nights out. They'd been waiting for me to be ready. Dominic's face had turned from pale to flushed. I recognized the signs of his anger building, the tightening of his jaw, the slight flare of his nostrils. He'd always had a temper, though he kept it carefully controlled in public. "This is a coordinated attack," he said, his voice dangerously low. "You've all been planning this, haven't you? You think you can push me out of my own company?" "Your company?" Bernard Wilson from the Business Journal had been quietly taking notes, but now he looked up with journalistic interest. "Wasn't Reynolds Enterprises built with Mrs. Reynolds' family seed money? Isn't she listed as co-founder in the incorporation documents?" I hadn't planted that question, but I could have kissed Bernard for asking it. The narrative was unraveling faster than even I had anticipated. Jessica stood suddenly, the diamond bracelet catching the light. "I should go," she mumbled, unable to meet anyone's eyes. "Sit down," Dominic ordered, his control slipping. "This isn't over." "It is for me," she replied, a flash of dignity breaking through her humiliation. "You told me Holly knew nothing about the business, that she was just a figurehead. You said she'd accept a divorce settlement and walk away." More murmurs rippled through the restaurant. Dominic looked like he might explode. I reached for my phone, my fingers steady as I dialed a number I'd memorized weeks ago. The restaurant fell silent as I put the call on speaker. "Patricia Monroe's office," came the crisp voice of my attorney's assistant. "This is Holly Reynolds. Please proceed with filing as discussed." My voice was clear, unhurried. "Yes, Mrs. Reynolds. The documents are prepared. We'll file electronically within the hour. The temporary restraining order regarding company assets should be in effect by morning." I ended the call and looked directly at Dominic. That was just the first step. The divorce papers cite the infidelity clause. The corporate filing documents my intellectual property claims on the analytics framework, the client management system, and the acquisition strategy model I developed. All currently attributed to you in company materials. Dominic's expression shifted from anger to panic. "You can't prove those were your ideas." "Actually, I can," I said, feeling a sense of liberation wash over me. "I've kept every notebook, every initial draft, every email where you asked me to explain complex models to you so you could present them as your own. 20 years of documentation, Dominic." I turned to Richard Henderson. "The analytics framework that increased client retention by 43% last year? The acquisition model that made our purchase of TechVantage possible at half its market value? The financial restructuring that saved us during the 2008 crash? All me." Richard's eyebrows rose. "Is this true, Dominic?" Dominic's silence was confirmation enough. Jonathan Meyer shook his head slowly. "The board needs to know about this, Dom. All of it." "I'll call an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning," Richard said, his investor's mind already calculating the implications. I stood up, gathering my clutch in the USB drive. "I believe my 45 minutes are up. I've made my position clear." I addressed the room at large. "I'm not just fighting for my fair share of Reynolds Enterprises. I'm taking back what was mine all along, recognition for the work I've done, the company I built." Turning to Dominic one last time, I removed my wedding ring and placed it next to the overturned water glass. "Happy anniversary." I walked out of La Maison with my head high, aware of every eye following my exit. The night air felt crisp against my skin, carrying the promise of freedom. I hadn't anticipated how light I would feel, as if I'd set down a burden I'd been carrying for years without realizing its weight. Behind me, I heard Dominic calling my name, his voice edged with desperation, but I didn't turn around. My driver, Marcus, was waiting by the curb as instructed, car door already open. "Everything all right, Mrs. Reynolds?" he asked, concern evident in his eyes. "Better than all right," I replied, sliding into the back seat. "Take me to the Langham, please." I'd booked a suite 2 days earlier, knowing I wouldn't be returning to our penthouse tonight. As Marcus pulled away from the curb, my phone began buzzing incessantly. I glanced at the screen. Calls from board members, business partners, friends. News traveled fast in our circles. I silenced the phone, needing time to process what had just happened. By morning, the Chicago business community was ablaze with the news. Bernard Wilson's article in the Business Journal was measured but devastating, detailing serious allegations of financial impropriety and intellectual property theft at Reynolds Enterprises. My phone had over 50 messages by the time I awoke. I answered only 3: Richard Henderson, Stephanie Winters, and Patricia Monroe. "The board has called an emergency meeting for noon," Richard informed me. Dominic is trying to paint this as a personal vendetta, but the financial documentation you provided is convincing. Will you be there? I asked, gazing out at the Chicago skyline from my hotel room. I wouldn't miss it, Richard replied. And Holly, for what it's worth, I always thought you were the brains of the operation. The call with Patricia confirmed that the temporary restraining order was in place, freezing company assets and preventing Dominic from making any major financial or operational decisions without board approval. The divorce filing had been processed. The wheels of justice were turning inexorably. I spent the morning carefully returning calls to key clients and partners, people whose relationships I'd cultivated over years. They'd received Dominic's version of events already. His assistant had been busy making damage control calls since dawn. Holly, Dominic says you're having some kind of breakdown, Charles Emerson, our oldest client, said cautiously. Charles, we've known each other for 15 years, I replied calmly. Have you ever known me to be unstable or irrational? No, he admitted after a pause. You've always been the steadiest person in the room. Then perhaps you should consider why Dominic would characterize it that way, rather than addressing the evidence. By noon, I had secured the support of our 3 largest clients, who collectively represented 40% of our annual revenue. They wouldn't be taking their business elsewhere, regardless of the company's leadership changes. The relationships I'd carefully nurtured for years, often cleaning up after Dominic's overpromises, were paying dividends. The board meeting, which I attended virtually, was brutal and efficient. Faced with the evidence Patricia and I had compiled, including documentation of unauthorized financial transfers, the board voted to place Dominic on administrative leave pending a full investigation. I was named interim CEO. When I finally returned to our penthouse that evening to collect some personal belongings, Dominic was waiting. He looked disheveled, his perfectly maintained appearance now as rumpled as his reputation. You've destroyed everything, he said as I entered, his voice hoarse. 20 years of marriage thrown away for what? Revenge. I set my bag down, surveying the space that had been our home. The gleaming marble countertops, the custom furnishings, the floor-to-ceiling windows with their perfect view, our golden cage. This wasn't revenge, Dominic. This was justice. The board has suspended me, he said as if I might not know. I own company. Our company, I corrected. And yes, I know. I was at the meeting. He stared at me, truly seeing me perhaps for the first time in years. How long have you been planning this? Since the day I overheard you telling Jessica I'd be out of the picture soon, I replied. But the groundwork was laid by you years ago when you decided I was disposable. When you started taking credit for my work. When you began the affairs. Dominic collapsed onto the sofa, head in his hands. I never thought you'd fight back like this. You were always so accommodating. That was my mistake, I acknowledged, moving around the room to collect photographs and personal items. I allowed myself to become a prisoner in this golden cage we built. I convinced myself the luxury compensated for the loneliness, that professional success could replace personal fulfillment. I paused at a photo from our early days, both of us beaming at the camera, full of hope and genuine love. You know what the saddest part is? I loved you. Truly loved you. Even after I suspected the affairs, I tried to rationalize them away. It was only when I realized you planned to push me out of the company that I finally saw clearly. I never meant to hurt you, he said, the lie sounding hollow even to him. Yes, you did, I corrected gently. Maybe not at first, but eventually hurting me became incidental to getting what you wanted. That's worse in some ways. I continued gathering my things, feeling his eyes follow me around the room. This space, which had once felt like a symbol of our success, now seemed like an elaborate stage set, beautiful but ultimately false. What happens now? He finally asked, sounding lost. How I rebuild, I answered simply. The company, my life. Everything. As I prepared to leave, Dominic made one last attempt. We could still fix this, Holly. The board, the company, us. I could make amends. For a brief moment, I remembered the young man I'd fallen in love with, the dreams we'd shared. But that person was gone, replaced by the broken man before me who still couldn't fully acknowledge what he'd done. Goodbye, Dominic. Walking out of the penthouse, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Vindication, yes, but also profound sadness for what had been lost. The golden cage that had once imprisoned me would now serve as Dominic's own prison of legal consequences and professional ruin. It wasn't a perfect victory. Nothing in life ever is. 2 days later, in my new office as interim CEO of Reynolds Enterprises, I reviewed the proposed rebranding strategy. The company would become Aurora Analytics, named after my grandmother who had provided the initial investment all those years ago. The logo would incorporate a rising sun, symbolic of new beginnings. As I signed the authorization forms, I glanced at the empty space on my finger where my wedding ring had been. 20 years of my life had been spent building this company alongside a man who never truly valued me. Now I would rebuild it on my own terms, reclaiming not just the business but myself in the process. The cage door was open, and I was finally free.